Hey everybody, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and today I have for you a tutorial on how to install a ferrule onto the transition of your bullwhip. Now ferrules not only provide kind of a cool, flashy finishing touch to your whips, but it also can draw attention to your transition knots. If you're going to install a ferrule, it's going to be very ideal to do two transition knots. Balances things out, and it also holds the knot in place. Now there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to adhesive, when it comes to something to hold this band, this collar, this ferrule, whatever you want to call it, in place. I used to think that you had to put glue on the overlay of your whip just so it wouldn't spin. And if you do that, that's fine. If it works for you, that's great. But I found a method that all you need to do is slide this thing onto the overlay of your whip, build the two foundations, tie your knots, and this thing will be held in place with no adhesive whatsoever. I can't even spin this. That's how tight it is. Now, what can you use for a ferrule or a collar on your whip? Well, I used to go the simple route when I was experimenting with things, and I would actually just take a copper pipe, a pipe cutter, or in my early days, a hacksaw, and cut a piece out like this, just cut a ring out. I didn't really like that method though, because as you can see on this collar here, which is made for the purpose, this is actually from NicksWhipShop. There's a link in the description, check them out. $4.95 for this little thing. You can't beat it. But this is made for the purpose. They actually use these for canes or walking sticks, and they refer to it as a collar. But since it's made for the purpose, as you can see, it's got a lip on it. On either end it has a lip, and that contributes to holding the knot in place. It keeps the knot from crossing over and kind of engulfing this ring. And that's something that would happen because there is no lip on a piece of pipe that you just cut off. And then the knots would creep out onto this thing, and I didn't really like that. So the size of ferrule that I'm using for this video is 21 millimeters. They have a few different dimensions, but I found that 21 millimeters works the best for my style of whip construction, which is 1/4-inch steel rod, plated belly, another plated belly, and an overlay. And I found that it fits over it the best. So in this video, 21 millimeter ferrule, TexasKnife.com. Let's get on with the tutorial. Hope you guys learned something new. As always, if you have any requests for a tutorial, comment. Thanks. Okay guys, we're getting ready to install the ferrule onto our bullwhip. This is a 6-foot 16-plat bullwhip that I have prepped and all ready for installation. As you can see, this whip has been heavily rolled, and I've also trimmed off the end strands and prepped this by giving it a nice roll. Now the construction of this whip that corresponds with the 21 millimeter ferrule from TexasKnife.com is a 1/4-inch steel rod, 8-plat belly, a 10-plat belly, and the 16-plat overlay, and I found that 21 millimeters is absolutely perfect. It's a little bit snug, but there's not a lot of wiggle room here. And if we go ahead and measure the diameter of the overlay, you'll find that it's pretty much 19 millimeters through and throughout. So we don't have to worry about anything. Now if you find that once you bind the end of the handle after you cut off the remnants of the steel rod, you might find that this, when you go to try to put the ferrule on, it's a little bit tight and it might not even go on. That's before you roll it. So if you find that happening, give this thing a hefty roll, put all your weight on it, and it should slide right over. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Take whatever you have binded off, whatever you use to bind the end of the handle, and to keep the strands from unraveling, take that off and do it again, maybe a little tighter, and use less artificial sinew or binding material. And that way you'll find that it should slip easily right over it. And if it doesn't, if you're still having trouble getting this to slide over onto the handle, don't worry about it. Order yourself up a new ferrule, but go with a 23 millimeter, and that should be fine. So I'm going to slide this on. We're getting ready to place it where we want it. And you can put this thing anywhere on the whip you want, anywhere on the handle that you want. I like mine to be about here, because this is where it starts to tighten up naturally. As the thong with the binding and everything, it naturally swells. So as you can see, it's starting to stop me there, and I like to give it a push here, and as you can see, that's solid, and that way it won't be spinning and it will be held in place. Not only, keep in mind, it's not the diameter that's holding this thing in place, it's going to be the knot foundations and the knots themselves that are going to keep this thing from moving. I just like to do this because it's a little more solid from the get-go, and it makes everything stay in place while you're working on it. Now, you can use this tape if you want to put it in a different place. I like it here. If you want it here, you can build up the diameter with this athletic tape, just so it doesn't slide around while you're working on it. But the place that I would like it, we don't need anything whatsoever. So I'm going to slide it to where it gets a little bit difficult because of the natural swell of the beginning of the thong, the transition. And I would like it to be just about here. That looks good. I like it where the diamond pattern transitions to the herringbone. We're here over at the workbench. I got the whip in a clamp, and we're getting ready to tie on and install the knot foundations that will go on either side of this ferrule here. Now let's just make sure we have this thing right where we want it. Once again, I want it where the diamond plait transitions to the herringbone. So just about right here, and you'll find that if you use this method that I'm using with whip construction, you'll find that it naturally stops you and gets tight, and that kind of tells you where to put the ferrule, because the thong has binding on it, the handle does not, so you're going to have that natural swelling going on there. So this is where I'd like it to be. It looks good. It's even. Okay, so I have here, this is about 6 to 7 ounce cowhide. We're going to cut 2 strips out of this stuff, and that's going to serve as our 2 foundations, knot foundations on both sides, on either side of our ferrule here. So I have here a spacer that I use a lot just to stay consistent. Trace this. Marker doesn't like to write on leather. Gotta go over it a few times. And I'm just snipping this. And we're just going to cut this in half. We're going to split this. These are our 2 foundations that we're going to fit on here. So these will serve as our 2 knot foundations. We're just going to test fit it, see if we need to do any trimming, which we usually do need to do some trimming. And I'm going to do that like I do every other piece of leather that serves as a knot foundation. I'm going to wrap it around, mark it with my fingernail right here. That's where I know where to cut it. And to bind these on, I'm going to use artificial sinew. Now this is very important. Make sure that you have see that little space in here? You want about 1/8 of an inch space, because when we tie the knot, the tops of the Turk's head knot will go into this ravine and add some pressure against this ferrule and pressure against the knot foundation. And that the pressure equally applied by each of the knots and knot foundations is what's going to hold this thing in place, in addition to the diameter being larger at the transition, and it's not gonna go anywhere. I'm going to cut a piece of artificial sinew. I'm going to wrap the first one around here. Make sure that that spacing is equal all the way around. It is almost. All right. Okay. And this artificial sinew has oils in it, so because of that we can press it right into itself here. So number 1 is good. It's time for the second one. Looks good. And now we're going to need to trim this one as well. And I can already see the bottom of this is a little bit wide. Flares out sometimes when you cut it. Measuring this one as well. Mark it with my fingernail. Cut it. Once again, we have a space here. Looks good. At this point, as overkill as it might be, which it most likely is, I like to take these wire brad nails and drive them, press them into the into each one of these, at least 2 per foundation. That way it's never going to go anywhere. It's very soft. You can just press it right in. I'm snipping the heads off these nails so it goes in flush. Just doesn't take a lot of extra time, and it's going to assure you that these are not going to go anywhere. Just some extra insurance. Assurance. And I just dropped it. It's gone. Okay, so our knot foundations are complete. Now we just have to tie the 2 knots. Now these knots are going to be 5x4 Turk's head knots. Each one of them is going to be a 2-pass knot. So I'm going to take about 5 feet, 4.5 feet of parachute cord, gut it, thread it up, it's time to tie them on. I like to tie my knots just to the left of where I'm working and then just slide them over the area that I'm working on. So we go like this, over, like that. Under. And we'll go under this one. Around the back we go over this one. Now we're starting from the beginning again. Now we're going over this one. Here's the one where we started. We're going over, under this one. Over this one, under this one. Finally, we go over this one, and now we're back to where we started. And I'm kind of going a little quicker on this because I already have a video on how to tie these knots. So if you're having trouble and you want to see it a little bit slower, please click on the knot tying tutorial in the link, and that'll help you guys immensely. And just apply the knowledge in that video to what I'm about to do. So we just tied here a 5x4 single pass knot. I'm going to slide this up and over our foundation, making sure that the spaces are even. And we're ready for our second pass. Over, under, just following the leader, following the strand that we started with. Make sure your strands don't get crossed up, or flipped, or twisted. See how it's creased in there? We want it to be in there. We don't want it to flow out over the ferrule. Over and under. Even spaces. Very important. Even spacing is very important for these types of transition knots that are, especially, we're putting a lot of pressure on these knots. These knots and the foundations are responsible for holding this thing in place. So sometimes you'll find that there's not a lot of room there. In all reality, I probably should have left myself a little bit larger of a gap than that. So learn from my mistake here and make these gaps a little bit larger, probably about another half the width of this one, but this won't be a problem. Just makes it easier if you start with the bigger. Pull that. And under these two. Under these two. And under these two to finish it off. And there's the first knot. Some of these may be a little bit loose, so we just fix that by feeling which strand it is. It's all one strand, but where it is, and pulling all the way around. One last tug to the remaining strands. And we're going to snip the strands and melt them lightly. I'm just going to lightly melt them and press them into the knot. We're going to set this down and give it a roll. And there you have the first knot. We're going to do the same thing with the next one. So we have both of our knots successfully tied. I'm going to snip the end, both ends here. Give them a little melt. And give them another roll. As you can see, I'm using the corner of this piece of wood to work my way into the corner just above the bead here on the ferrule. Give the other knot a little roll. Well, that completes the tutorial for today. We have successfully installed a brass ferrule in between two 5x4 2-pass Turk's head knots onto the transition of our whip. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let me know what you thought of the new GoPro filming style for the tutorials. As always, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.